recorded live.
Hello, welcome to the Virtualization Security and Cloud Security Roundtable, episode number 81. We've been doing this for 81 times 2 weeks now, so that's great. Our panelists today are Eben Rodriguez, who consults with enterprises and actually works at eBay as a virtualization architect these days. Virtualization security architect, I should say. Michael Berman is the CTO of Catbird. He's actually going to be replaced by Malcolm Rike when he shows up, Director of Security and Engineering at Catbird. Boris Strungen, who's a co-founder and currently VP Advanced Products at HighTrust, with 20 years of experience in software development, enterprise systems, and security. Myself, Edward Haletke, a.k.a. TexIWill in the VMware Communities Forum, and author of the book VMware vSphere and Virtual Infrastructure Security, as well as VMware ESX and ESXi in the Enterprise, 2nd edition. Our special guest panelist this week is Matt Richards, who is a product strategist at OwnCloud, and a whole bunch of great degrees behind him. Welcome, panelists.
Hey, happy to be here. Thanks.
Thank you.
So, since this is really a little bit about cloud-based storage, Matt, why don't you give us about 3 to 5 minutes of what OwnCloud does?
Sure. I think the fastest way to explain this as to what OwnCloud is and does, think of it as a Dropbox you host yourself. That's really the easiest way to think about what OwnCloud is. And Dropbox has done a lot to show us a series of requirements and needs that we had as consumers we didn't know we had before, one of which was that anywhere, any way, any device access to your files wherever you are. And that's pretty cool to be able to build a market or build demand from nothing. It's kind of fun to witness. But naturally, if you've been following the space, you guys understand, even if you haven't, the level of security that something like that can introduce, the security gaps and holes and compliance issues for large enterprises. I guess if you're listening to this, you probably have used Gmail a time or two to send yourself a file that couldn't fit in the corporate email system. Well, chances are you probably also are using Dropbox to do something like that, to get access to your files and folders, sometimes in work, sometimes without. And chances are it's all perfectly innocent. It's just you find it easier to get the job done if you have something like Dropbox. Well, what we're providing is a form of file sync and share software that you can host behind the firewall at an enterprise, at a service provider in a private instance, or even, I happen to run it on an old 32-bit server in the basement that I host myself for my own family. So OwnCloud is a pretty powerful little tool that we were happy to launch yesterday. So trust me when I say I'm happy to get some sleep now.
But it's also an open source, a fairly large open source community, right?
Oh, absolutely. OwnCloud is based on a project, the OwnCloud project, which started in January of 2012, so a little over 2 years ago now. And we're talking about roughly 400,000 users of it to date, and all of that, of course, until yesterday when we launched, was open source use. And that community has been fairly active, pretty healthy, contributing to the creation of the product in the first place. And we launched our support services and some of our mobile apps and desktop clients just earlier this week.
So when you start talking about OwnCloud, you're effectively this open source software, you have a business model around it, and you're saying host your own Dropbox.
Well, we didn't say it, actually. Interestingly enough, some of our friends in the media that picked up the story were quoting them. They were the first ones to coin it that way. It's just the fastest and easiest way to explain what we do.
But, okay, how is it? Well, this is a virtualization and cloud security podcast, so the question then becomes is, how does your security differ than what Dropbox does? Is it better? Is it worse? Is it different?
Well, it starts really at this core tenet that we have that sets the basis for all of this, which is that it's your cloud, it's your data, your way. And what we provide is, let's start with the idea that this is running in your data center. So you're standing this up alongside your infrastructure. You're standing this up and plugging it into your web farm if you're an enterprise. You have intrusion detection software, you have single sign-on solutions, you have standards and policies and procedures for managing your live web servers today. We stand up as an app that fits nicely right into that environment. And we've been building web apps for, 15 years, end-tier web apps for quite some time, and we plug right into that infrastructure. And that's really the first step when we think about security.
Okay. What about, I'm sorry.
What about file level? Question. Go ahead, Forrest.
Sorry,
you first.
Go ahead.
First.
Even go first.
Okay. So just, it's kind of exciting. You said like Dropbox. So besides the server components that it sounds like are open source, do you have like apps that can go on the mobile devices?
Absolutely, we do. We have we think of them as clients and apps in addition to the OwnCloud server itself. The clients are the desktop, so Linux, Mac, Windows, and the mobile apps are Android and iOS today.
Wow, that's exciting. Okay, Boris, you're next.
Yeah, this sounds really great. My question is, what about file level protection? You mentioned, going back to security. You mentioned that, you aiming towards the enterprise. Enterprises have their own security mechanisms and so on. But what about your own file level protection? Do you encrypt files? Do you provide, developed access control? Is there some kind of key management for all of this? Can you tell us a bit more?
Sure. Today, the product that we launched yesterday has I'll just call it very rudimentary, very basic level security. SSL encryption in transit, server-side encryption on the storage, and then on the devices, PIN-based access. In the future, and in upcoming releases, we'll be integrating in a form of PKI infrastructure to manage security on those devices and also on those files as they exist both on the desktop as well as on the server and in transit in between.
So it sounds like one key difference security-wise is that unlike with Dropbox, you can protect your own keys if you install this yourself.
Correct. That's also, you can also always usually in an enterprise you can point to the folks who are managing your servers and make sure that they're following your corporate policies and procedures as it comes to key management as well. So, of course, some of that just comes with being able to host it yourself. But yes.
What about access control? Can you provide, granular access to individual users, groups,
yes,
and so on?
Well, there's a couple things here. Today we do users and groups. It's user and group based. As we roll forward, we have a concept we call CRUDs. We borrowed it from the database world, where you can specify on a granular level for a particular file, create, read, update, delete, and sync privileges. So you can create a new file or read the files that are there, update the files, delete the files, or the last piece being you can sync that file to your devices. So create, read, update, delete, sync, and you can either grant that to a user or to a user as it relates to a specific file or folder. That's what we call CRUDs, and it's coming. In the next release, we're laying the foundation for it. We do releases with the community every 3 months. So 6 months from roughly now, we'll be seeing the first release of CRUDs-based granular control of files and folders.
So what happens right now? Is there any encryption at all of the data? Or is it just in transit?
In transit and on the server side. We integrate very closely with the operating system at the operating system level on the server side. So in terms of where it's sitting in the cloud or in the private cloud in the enterprise, it's encrypted if the administrator so chooses. So it's server side integrated with the encryption in the operating system level. Now, in the future, as I say, we'll be rolling in PKI infrastructure with dual keys, administrative keys, and user keys in case you lose one, and more. And so there's some architectural discussions as to the best approach to implementing such a multi-key system. How do you do it so that each user can have a shared file and have access to something in a secure manner, guaranteeing they are who they say they are and guaranteeing they only get what they're supposed to say? That's a whole other layer of conversation around architectures, which we're still debating the pros and cons and designing that implementation.
So, the whole marketplace for file sharing, it's been growing pretty rapidly, and there's a bunch of players there, right? There's Box, there's Dropbox, there's Microsoft with SkyDrive, there's Google supposedly coming out with an offering, there's iCloud.
Yep.
And then there's backup providers like Mozy and Carbonite and more. Where do you see yourselves, fitting in? Is it just the enterprise market? You're specifically targeting that?
No, well, that is part of the target. The interesting thing about OwnCloud, at least from my perspective, and one of the reasons I find it so intriguing, we are an open source company. Marcus, our CEO, myself, several other folks who are executives in the company, we have an open source history. So when it comes to building out open source software, there's a few channels beyond just direct sales to the enterprise that are particularly interesting, and where open source has proven very effective and been very successful. I could point to just about every device in your house has a form of Linux in it. Well, okay, not all of them, but very many of them. Your TiVo, your set-top box, your routers, et cetera, right? So the open source model for OEMing has been particularly powerful right now. And to exactly your point, right, this is an extremely busy market right now. There's a ton of noise. So what we're seeing is a large number of folks who are looking to get a file sync and share solution of their own into the market, like right now. And interestingly enough, closed-sourced software solutions tend to make that rather difficult to OEM. So we see a large number of OEM opportunities, whether hardware vendors, service providers who have other offerings they want to augment, elements like that, where this has proven to be a very, shall I say, interested space in this particular solution. So it's very interesting to the enterprise, of course, because it does solve some of their problems. But some of the other interested channels and avenues to customers are through some of those OEMs and some of those channel partners who are looking to augment and deliver on their file sync and share needs from their customers.
So are you talking to people like service providers to OEM with them?
Yes, absolutely. And that has a lot to do with region. And picture this, you're in the Far East and Amazon starts moving in with a data center. Well, okay, now what do you do? And what you do is to be relevant and to remain relevant, you offer that geographical isolation, or for various regulatory reasons, you have to host the data within a country in Europe, for example. There's a number of ways in areas in which having your own hosted service of something that's as popular as Dropbox is a significant advantage for you in the market. So it's been a lot of interest from the service providers.
Yeah.
I have a question on cloud. Being cloudy, to me, is meaning more and more. It's meaning that you have some automation capabilities built in. Can you talk about that at all?
That's interesting. I think from OwnCloud has been defined back when it was started 2.5 years ago, when cloud was probably a little less defined along those lines. And it was designed, or the name anyway, was a cloud of devices to support your files, really. So.
Well, they talk about on-demand kind of thing. So if you need more capacity, you sort of automate it as needed. So, let's take that example. So, say I needed more capacity I set it up initially with so many gigs of space. If I need to add more, is there a way to automate that, or does someone need to go in there and do it, manually?
Well, so let's say you stuck yourself into, on a physical server, or it could be a virtual server, and you ran out of space. You do need to allocate yourself more space. The system itself does not delta that automation, although any of the various automated data center automation solutions could easily allocate more space or assign a drive without a whole lot of trouble.
So it doesn't need like a block storage. It could use an NFS maybe, and as long as you could add space to NFS, it would know that it was there and automatically. Yep. Okay, good.
Yeah, it's actually the easiest way to think about it on the back end from a storage perspective. If you can mount it in Linux, we can see it and use it.
Perfect.
Which to your cloud question, opens a whole other avenue about being able to mount storage from other cloud providers.
Right.
Inside it. So imagine a day where, there's something really, I know this, I don't want to wander too far off topic, but if you're a user of something like Dropbox in the cloud today, right, you have a certain expectation, and you use that device or use your devices and you access your files. Imagine then an enterprise comes along and tries to force you for enterprise work to stop using that Dropbox thing and start using whatever it is they provide you.
Right.
Okay, I get that, right? But now you have two. Who wants two? Right?
Yep.
So part of what we're offering with OwnCloud isn't just, a standalone file sync and share solution. Okay, that's cool. But also the ability to mount inside it your own personal stuff, not so the enterprise can manage it for you, but so that you can manage it through one location. So imagine you have your Dropbox mounted on in your corporate server, and you simply mount your, excuse me, let me say that again. You have OwnCloud on your corporate server, simply mount Dropbox right inside it. And so now you have access to you uniquely using your own keys, right? Access to your own Dropbox files, which are personal. They just pass through the enterprise. There's no responsibility on the enterprise's part to store them or take any responsibility for what's in it. And yet at the same time, you have one place for all your files. Now, isn't that cool? And that's how we tend to think about this market. You got to really think about this from the perspective of the end user, who's actually quite happy with Dropbox and will continue to use it over 3G if you try to block it at the firewall in the enterprise. So,
now, just to be clear, you mentioned earlier the data is encrypted inside the storage.
Yeah, it can be. It doesn't have to be, of course, but it can be, and it's in on the OS at the OS level.
Okay, so there's
so
no
what do you mean by the OS level? Who's doing the encrypting?
Well, you mount a storage volume on the server to begin with. That's sort of the very basic level where we are today. And then next generation is the PKI infrastructure where it's encrypted from the beginning on the client side all the way through. There's some downsides to encrypting it on the client side, one of which is you can't do deltas, right? Because if a file changes and you re-encrypt it and ship it over the wire to ship the whole thing, or it doesn't make any sense on the far end. So
let's step back there for a second.
Yep.
So we know it's SSL, so, okay, what about the SSL man-in-the-middle attack? So we'll get back to that one. You're saying right now you use the OS to do encryption. Well, no OS encrypts the file system by default.
Correct.
So you're clearly looking at, if you're at my OS, I would have to be able to do an encrypted OS. So you're talking about something like a TrueCrypt volume, which requires the password to access when you're booting that machine. So that's what you're talking about, or are you talking about something else?
No, that's what I'm talking about on the server side for the version release yesterday.
So the version released yesterday, in order to do encryption at all, I need to encrypt the volume at the OS level using something, since it's a Linux machine, you're talking about TrueCrypt.
Yep.
So, in other words, in order to boot that VM, I need the password.
Correct.
Now, that means I have one encryption key for everybody.
Correct. Yep. That's at
Okay,
the OS
so
level.
it's extremely, so what we're talking about, OwnCloud is really an individual person's cloud because you're not allowed,
Ed, it's still a lot better in Dropbox, for example, as far as the model goes, because each organization or department could have their own storage. You could have a shared one and a department one. But I agree with you, it's not per user. So definitely, that sounds like that might be coming down the road.
It is.
But for now, it's a step in the right direction. But it's great.
Well, I'm not even sure it's a step in the right direction. The reason being is that people who do keys for TrueCrypt use really, really silly ones to start with. And yeah, I'm encrypting data at rest, but there's no, unless I'm running, well, actually not anything inside of VMware. I know Hyper-V and Zen and KVM have the same problem. That volume, once I try mounting it,
there's a lot of problems.
I have to type in the password, so I have to be on the system to do that, which means I need yet another way to do management to get onto it. So we're doing right now, I see it as an individual's data store. I can't see it as an organization's.
All right. If say I were a company and I wanted to get away from Dropbox to something more secure, wouldn't you agree that this would allow me to have my own keys for my data instead of Dropbox owning the keys?
Not possible.
I could set up a OwnCloud for my team to use, and they could put their apps on it. Now, let's ask this question to the OwnCloud.
Well, now I got this whole thing. The whole thing about using TrueCrypt or something like that means that if that person who owns the key is suddenly not available and you got to reboot the VM, that data is no longer available until you get access to that guy. So you got a single point of failure unless you give the key to everybody.
Why wouldn't you have a backup person that you can go to?
And if something happens to both those, you have a problem. So it sounds very individualized instead of very corporate-wise.
It does, based on just to throw in comments from our customer base. It does depend greatly on the nature of what they're trying to do, the use case, and what they're trying to solve. Certainly in some circumstances, you're absolutely right. There's no argument there, which is part of the reason why we're looking at the PKI infrastructure in the next, or similar, in the next evolution here. But
so let's say each person had their own, so say we go with Ed, and each person has their own TrueCrypt key and their own cloud. How many own clouds can I access from like my mobile device at once? Can I see a bunch of them? Can I share them? You know, like I could have a team one and a personal one and a company one.
Today the client accesses one, but the next set, and you can access multiples. Right. So you can point yourself to multiple. But today it's about one, and it's about your clients, your desktop clients you can sync multiple folders with that one, and then your mobile apps can access that one as well. Now you can easily unlink. It's very simple. There's a button, and you enter the address of the other one, and now you're pointed at that one instead. So it's really quite simple.
Got it.
And it was designed that way because I have like 4 instances myself, and I switch between them depending on what I'm doing.
Doesn't it sync the data from the instance to the local device if you want?
It does on the desktop client side. We don't do that automatically on the mobile side simply for space reasons.
It seems like as you go between instances, does it get out of sync, or does it, as you flip back to, like, say you're going from A to B to C and then you went back to A, would it know that A was already synced and it wouldn't sync it all again?
On the mobile device, there is the syncing is manual. It's actually on it. You have to define what you want to grab out of the
per
app.
file. That's like Dropbox.
Yep, exactly. But on the desktop version, it does a delta comparison on the folder, and the folder hasn't changes. It won't sync the changes.
Cool.
So I have a question about syncing and sort of the maturity of the implementation. I wonder, Matt, if you can tell us, did you base it on some well-known syncing mechanism like rsync, or did you write your own?
Based on a well-known syncing format like rsync, yes.
Okay. So it's pretty mature then.
It's fairly
mature, well-proven, reliable.
Yeah, we didn't make this up from scratch, and part of the reason was for that purpose, but also because its roots and the core server is still a community-developed and managed, in many ways, a community-built server. So there's been a lot of work on C-Sync and some of the libraries to bring them up to snuff on this.
What about mobile devices? Did you use rsync there as well?
No, because we're not doing delta comparisons. We're doing manual, because you're actually, like on Dropbox, you're grabbing files and manually downloading and uploading them. You can do multiples at a time, but you're grabbing each one individually. Because of the space on your mobile phone, at this point in time, folks don't tend to do syncs. They do downloads of files they want, and then they store those locally. So, like on Android, you grab a Word doc, you bring it down, you use QuickDocs to edit it, and then you can upload it when you're done. And then once it hits the server, it does the comparison and pushes that out to the other clients.
Okay. And for your PKI infrastructure, as you mentioned, you're going to implement some. Are you going to use one of the existing ones, or are you going to write your own? It's
probably going to be one of the existing open source as a base, and then we'll have to make some modifications thereof. That's what we're looking at. There's not a lot that's fully out of the box going to handle this particular scenario, especially given some of the necessities of being able to encrypt data stored on mobile devices. Right. Another question is to follow up. You know that there's some additional file sharing offerings that are coming soon, most notably Google. Google's supposed to come up with some kind of file sharing. Do you know anything about it? How do you compare with those guys? Well, there's a couple ways in which, Google will come out with like a G drive or something like that. Not so different from it's sort of like I think of it as Google Docs, Google Drive, and a lot of these cloud-based offerings are interesting public cloud-based file sync and share. The problem is in a lot of cases that's just not enough control for your enterprise, for the IT department that really is the target buyer of a lot of the on-site sync and share solutions. Beyond that, you can host your own. That's the first thing. Second, we can actually mount. We're not really competing with them. We can actually mount them inside us and let you continue to use that, assuming there's a mount point. So, for example, you can mount Google Docs, right? So Google Docs appears like a folder inside OwnCloud. If you want to use that plugin from the community, you can go ahead and mount Google Docs and still have local access to all of your cloud-based Google Docs and sync them. That's just an example of how you augment that, because this is really it's not a cloud drive so much as it is a sync and share solution, and it's not really a backup solution. Sometimes it's good to describe what you don't do. Backup is a whole different animal. You want cloud backup. That's a background task that takes a lot of time to categorize everything on your hard drive and slowly over time in the background synchronize it, and then do regular backups on a monthly basis, and it might take you a week to get all your files up into the cloud backup solution, right?
But
Right.
Some people think of Dropbox as good for backups because it does versioning.
Sure.
How do you guys handle that?
So versioning is OwnCloud 4, which is the community edition due out in 30 days. Is slated to have a full versioning integration and rollback capability. So essentially, think of it as it's a built-in versioning and rollback. So if there's a conflict, it'll tell you, and you can roll back to a previous. At the same time, you can roll back to a previous version that was 20 versions ago if you want. Of course, that's administrator set, so you could run out of space pretty quick or run out of a timeline that the admin sets, and then it's gone. But that versioning becomes a very important feature for folks who accidentally delete all their files one day, for example. If you've ever done that in Dropbox, all the files disappear, and literally they're gone. You know, it can be very difficult to get those files back. So, quick unplug the network.
Right. And then, how are you guys making money? Because, I mean, if it's all open source.
That's a great business model question. One of the things, there's the obvious open source business model, and then there's a few others. So the first one is its support and maintenance patches and certification of the software. So you get the community edition out in January. It's now first week in April. The support, we offer our support for that edition. The next community edition comes out in 30 days, and we'll be offering support for that about 6 weeks after that. So we certify, we patch, we update, and then we deploy, and then we deliver the core server and all the mobile clients that go along with it.
I got you.
Right, and so that's part of the business model. There's the subscriptions and the certification.
So it's kind of like how Dropbox had their free one, and then they have, I think, something called groups or something. Yeah, they have the team folders and things. But it's actually more like the Linux business model. I mean, that's really the standard or Sugar CRM or any of those folks who charge you a support subscription if you want support, but otherwise you can have the bits with no support. Yeah. But in addition, there's actually a couple more there. So is there a question?
No, go on. I was just going to see if we can change the subject just a bit.
Understood. So the other two ones are pretty easy. We do some proprietary extensions to it, the management panel, and other things that make managing OwnCloud a lot easier. And the last piece, and then I'll let us wander the topic back, is the OwnCloud proprietary license. We actually own the copyright to the OwnCloud code, so we can license it in a manner that does not require changes to be rolled back to the open source community. So for these OEM contracts, for example, that we talked about earlier, if you have a hardware device and you want to embed OwnCloud, it's really simple, and because we can license it to you, we can make some customizations for integration with your particular environment on that OEM device, and that's of significant amount of value. So there you go, three ways.
So let's draw this into a different type of conversation, and that is the generic use of cloud storage of this type. I mean, having OwnCloud in your own data center is great, but if you move to the cloud, you're probably going to use something else, or you may have something else you're using. The big question becomes, how can you do any governance with having data basically spread all over where you have no idea where it is?
Just let me clarify your question, Ed, so I understand what you're asking. You said inside your company, good, it's all kind of M&M security model, hard on the outside, soft in the middle. But
I never said that. I
well,
fully believe in defense in depth.
Well,
I want it hard everywhere.
We're implying there's some inherent security from having it inside your organization, but not exposed to the internet. Maybe is what I kind of assumed.
Exactly.
But if we're in the cloud, is what you said, then that's where it kind of might have some more concerns. Now, by cloud, you mean hosted on the internet on a public cloud provider, right?
Doesn't necessarily need to be public. It could be private. It could be a hybrid cloud. In other words, you no longer necessarily have a strong firewall.
Okay. Got it.
I mean,
so on that note,
it's not necessary. This has nothing to do with OwnCloud per se.
Yeah.
It's really a lot to do with, the whole concept of when we use cloud-based storage, which a lot of companies are. I mean, there's not a single company I know that doesn't use it in some form, whether or not it's Google with Gmail, that's a cloud-based storage thing, or they're using Salesforce for all their data, which is also cloud-based storage, or they allow Dropbox use so I can get data on my iPhone and my iPad, in my desktop, or I use Oxygen, or I end up using a G Drive, or I use
SkyDrive.
SkyDrive, you name it, or I use iCloud. I have all these different storage places for cloud that now, and even if I have my own cloud where actually I'm a tenant of another cloud provider and I set up an own cloud server inside there, now I have drives restoring inside of, basically the data is stored somewhere else. I just have the server to it. And the data is presented to my VM somehow, or maybe I have yet another way where I'm using something like Twin Strata where I'm presenting data from an Atmos server over iSCSI to a location. Now we have a huge governance problem and a whole different type of security ball of wax going on because I have my data almost everywhere.
Yep.
And now we're talking about how can I get any type of security or even compliance in that model?
Well, it screams for encryption, and from my perspective, you know your data could be anywhere, so you need to provide key management and encryption for that data if it's sensitive. If it's not, I mean, a lot of companies have a use case where they want to share the data. It could be, collateral for ads or something that is already public, so they don't really care about protecting it too much, and that's fine. That's what a CDN is, right? So you're talking about the opposite of a distribution network. You want to share it, but keep it controlled, right?
Well, it's not necessarily that. Yes, in a way. I mean, maybe Project Horizon's the way to do this, but I doubt it. I mean, all that boils down to is that my data is spread so thin across
Project Horizon.
Horizon App Manager from VMware.
Oh, yeah, they were talking about that.
Unified
allows you to
authentication.
have a single point of authentication, but at the same time, my data is still elsewhere. And I don't have a very strong infrastructure for doing key-based encryption because everybody will have different keys and weak keys.
So that's a good point. And we were just talking about OwnCloud and how it doesn't really have that key management built in yet. They're looking at implementing a PKI solution for it down the road. I wonder if there isn't a PKI solution that works for all these different cloud providers, cloud storage providers, or if each one's going to come up with their own sort of proprietary version. Because it's going to be the same thing as the password problem,
Right.
Who's managing my keys? I got a key for this, a key for that, a key for the other, right?
Right.
And that ends up being I think when you start thinking about all this, it's like, okay, how do I manage an environment where you really don't know how the data is encrypted on wherever it is? I could encrypt it before I put it someplace. Like, for example, if I wanted to put something on Dropbox, maybe I should create my own TrueCrypt image that I can actually use with my own key, stick it on Dropbox, and I could then use that to stick anywhere. But then it becomes very personalized data because TrueCrypt doesn't do PKI very well.
Well, and the whole thing, it's not a file level, and it's not per file. You can't just open up one file, right? Like on your iPhone. It's the whole, you got to unlock the whole thing, and then when you're done, you got to kind of close it back down. I like the convenience of Dropbox on the mobile apps because, like with an iPad, I can just go right to the file I want and access it. And maybe I need to see another file, so I can close that one. And I kind of like that, so I use that a lot. And it'd be great if there was a way to do that securely while maintaining the convenience.
Well, the biggest, so we actually have these conversations late at night ourselves because we're trying to deal with this from an OwnCloud perspective. Is what do you do? And my biggest issue is getting a good model for how to think about the range, size, and shape of data. Because I think once you have a sense of where it is, what it is, and who's using it to do what, you can start to more adequately control it and provide controls. But the one thing we always struggle with is how do we make those controls so transparent, like Dropbox, kind of transparent, that they just work.
Well,
this is not
one thing I can say, there needs to be a policy around this. So we need to have different types of policies. So some files could be shared that are public.
Mm-hmm.
That might be a public policy that I could apply to a file, like tag it. And then another one might be something that I want to share with the team. So it might have a lifetime, say a 30-day lifetime, that anyone with this token can access it, but then it expires.
Yep.
Another one might be like so sensitive that I want to share it with this other individual, and in order for them to access it, they need to come back to the key server to confirm that it's still valid, and then it evaporates after it's done. So this kind of dynamic policy-based idea.
But you have to have positive control and like some form of policy governor for that to work.
Exactly.
Right? We don't have either today. Not that we couldn't. But that's what we, those are the conversations that get really interesting. So let's
those are the ones that's what you're talking about. If you really want this in the enterprise, any type of this, you need those policy controls, and they can't be unique to company.
Correct.
And at the same time, you need transparency all the way through to say what really is happening when I get down to the disk. Is it encrypted at rest? We don't know. Is it encrypted in a fashion where it's a shared encryption? In other words, it's SSL to the thing encrypted, they decrypt it with their key, they do a comparison, they re-encrypt it if they need to, and it's more of a deduplication, which is what Dropbox does. Or Oxygen, which they encrypt it in motion, they encrypt it locally, send it up, decrypt it, and then do something there to encrypt it again. Eventually, I have no idea what the keys are. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. But the cloud, you're right, by the way. There you do lose track of what keys where. And there's
I lose track of the keys. And this is not just, iCloud does something similar as well. I have no access to the keys there. I go to SkyDrive, I doubt I'll have access to the keys there. The thing ends up being is that in order to put something up there right now, all the security specialists say, encrypt it before you put it up there using your own encryption.
Right.
Do a cloud gateway type of encryption before you get there. Okay, great, but the overhead of doing that is pretty heavy.
Yeah, then it becomes really tough to do a text search.
Well, you're right, but that's, then you need tokenization possibilities. It becomes an interesting concept.
I agree that it seems like the safest way to do it is to encrypt on the client with your own key and then have the backend encrypted again with its own key. So it's a sort of a two-key encryption, but it's pretty heavy. It's it takes a lot of cycles, and you could store some metadata with each file, so you can search them to an extent, but you cannot do a full text search in that case.
Right.
Well, even then, selecting the metadata is an Alta Vista type of search problem. They wrote some great search algorithms. You need to keep the keywords somewhere. It ends up being only what you tag it as, and your tags themselves could be, if you start using those types of things in search keywords, now you have the possibility of leaking information regardless.
Just because of the search. That's interesting.
Right.
So all of this requires, it sounds like, though, what we're talking about in this solution is a fairly closed system. It's got some form of gateway metadata tracking. It's got some form of PKI infrastructure, at least part of it. And even if there's multiple infrastructures that's hopping in between, this is a fairly closed system, and the challenge I guess I have is that a lot of this data needs to be recaptured. It's already out there. So how do you discover it so that it can be recaptured so that you can create somewhat of a closed system? Or is that even possible?
Well, that's a different story entirely. I'm thinking about just using these tools in a safe fashion. If I'm talking about capturing what I already have out there, forget it. You're not going to. The reason why I say that is that I can't go to Dropbox and say, okay, I can go to Dropbox, pull all my data down, but I can't go to Dropbox and say, you need to delete my data using DoD wipes. It just won't happen. If I go to Google and I use Google Docs, my Google Docs are now up on Google, and I'm using that as a data store, and I may actually digitally sign things, but you know what? My data's still there.
Mm-hmm.
Chances of me going to Google and saying, hey, I need you to do a DoD wipe is nil.
Yeah.
The same thing with Amazon. I could do S3 and say, okay, yep, I want to put it up there, and now I want to pull it back. The chance of me getting it all back is good, but the chances of me saying, hey, it can't live there anymore, you got to get rid of it 100% is also nil. So getting the data, I think, back to do something else with it is great, but I've already got it proliferate all over the place.
Yeah, and don't forget that it's
problem.
probably replicated all over, across multiple data centers. So it's, the data deletion problem is actually very fundamental because with multiple replication capabilities, which all the clouds do, Amazon and all the others, it's virtually impossible to make sure that there's no copy anywhere. So the only way to protect yourself is to encrypt on the server. Really?
You better encrypt before you do it and say, okay, I've encrypted before I did it. Now, if I ought to do is just throw away my keys. Right?
Yeah.
When I collect it all back, which means I decrypt it. Now I have to throw away all my keys for all the data that is proliferated out there, and then start with brand new keys on something like OwnCloud or something else. I mean, how does this compare to Octopus, which is trying to do the exact same thing from VMware?
How does
this problem exists for everybody, right?
No, how does which compare? I'm sorry. The solution we're talking about, or?
Well, OwnCloud plus the ability to pull data back. I mean, VMware is going to have the same. We're going to have to start talking about the same exact thing.
Yeah, some of it just has to do with the nature of the supported infrastructure, right? The goal of we are not trying to take over the world one hypervisor at a time. And we are an app software company, and that's pretty much it. So VMware has a slightly different, I think, approach for Octopus.
Well, just the name.
Right? Yeah, let's get that too. And by the way, of course, we can run in VMware. We like VMware, but just not the same necessarily the same goal, or shall I say, the same means to the same goal.
Okay, I understand that. I'm just I'm thinking about this in a more broader sense, I guess. Yeah.
Well, so in that situation, I'd actually be interested in your take on Octopus and because I don't know if you remember Project Redwood. VMware is very good at letting people know about stuff ahead of time and making a big splash of the idea that it's ahead of time. I'm curious your take on Octopus as it relates to these issues. Have they solved these issues?
I don't know of anybody that has. It's not an issue with any one tool. It's an issue with proliferation of data in the first place.
So here's the question. I mean, if VMware, is it structured data or unstructured data?
As far as I know, it's unstructured. It's just files.
Yeah, and then the only reason that becomes, I think, really interesting is from the service provider angle if you're a VMware service provider, I would think, and also as an enterprise because you probably have VMware, right? It might be interesting to you there too. But they also have a ton of structured data that they would have resident in all the virtual machines and all the clouds running.
I'm not sure they're going to use it for that. But then again, I'm not 100% positive what they're going to use it for. But I'm just thinking about we got a problem coming up that most people don't realize, and that is that with the proliferation of data in the cloud and the replication among clouds, there's no way for me to be sure that data is ever gone.
Unless you encrypted it before you put in there and you own the keys.
Even if you encrypted it before you put it in there.
But then if you own the keys and it's encrypted, you just shred the keys and the data is useless.
Well, true, but if I have something like a cloud gateway like Cloud Passage and I'm putting my data in Salesforce, I have to forget Cloud Passage because it makes up the keys. Right.
Well, I mean, there's different ways to do it, but I'm just saying, like, without talking about how it's done, if we can talk about the requirements, can we agree that encrypting your data before you put it in the cloud and owning your own keys could give you that solution?
In theory, I would say yes.
Yeah, I agree. It raises another now management problem. How do you manage access to all those keys from multiple devices that you normally use? So it's a management problem now, right? The data is encrypted, it's safe. Now you have to have access to the keys at any time from any device, anywhere.
With the horsepower to decrypt it.
Once you define the solution, the way to implement the solution is where, you could write it. I could tell you write it on a piece of paper and put it in your wallet. But guess what? We have digital replacements for that nowadays. So maybe a mobile device or some other solution is the way to go to keep track of your keys. But then that would have to be protected.
Right? It works well for individuals. For enterprises, it's not going to work because they have all kinds of issues with having to have access in any kind of emergency situation. Having to have central access. All kinds of stuff.
That's called key escrow. A number of solutions exist for that today, but I don't know that they're necessarily working with the cloud vendors, and that's why I asked about the automation capabilities.
It's interesting.
Yeah, interesting issues.
Because this is the sort of thing that, first everyone starts using it, then people start asking these questions.
Yeah.
When it's almost, as we said, it's already too late to recapture the data. So in a lot of cases, the damage is done. It just hasn't hit the press yet.
And the other thing I think that's changing rapidly in the market is enterprises more and more adopting open source solutions. So my first thought might be to say something like, well, you should really integrate and test with our solution that we use here, PGP Desktop Enterprise solution, right? Because that's what everybody uses. But it turns out, although the companies bought that and they're trying to push it, maybe not everybody's using it. You still got people using Dropbox left and right.
Well,
so, even though a better solution exists, right? But open source, it seems like, is where people are going, and I believe there is an identity solution that's coming with OpenStack.
Mm-hmm.
That might be a really cool place to sort of, since you're already open source based, to sort of plug in some compatibility. You don't even have to really do the work. You could just put it out there as an idea, right? And somebody else will do it.
It's one of the places. There's Project Keystone in OpenStack that does unified authentication. It's one of the places, absolutely, but it's not the only one.
Well, and therein is some of that's the challenge. It's and in many situations, the functionality exists in the open source solution, but it's not like it's out of the box. It's close, maybe, but there's still a fair amount of work to put it together in exactly the way you need to be implementing it. And that's the challenge with pure open source, is the deltas to implement it in the environment you're in, and then the need to support that open source tweak you made for the duration of the system. It's not necessarily simple to take a pure open source, but that's why OpenStack's so helpful, because it's got the support of frankly, of Rackspace and others behind it. So.
Okay. So, any last thoughts, Stephen?
Well, I know people asking for Dropbox replacements every day, specifically for the security concerns. So I'm glad to see this coming out. and I'll be tracking it. I'm really interested in seeing how you go about doing PKI. So
we'd actually
I'll be following that.
I would be thrilled to have your input too. You
yeah,
can never
if you need
get
beta testers.
Yeah.
Let us know.
I think that sounds like a good request. I've got your contact info now. You better watch out.
Boris?
Well, as I said before, this whole segment of the market is pretty lively right now. File sharing in the cloud, cloud-based backups, which is somewhat different take on it. I mean, it's growing by leaps and bounds. I'm really interested to see an open source solution emerging. Security, as we just discussed, I mean, it's going to be one of the major issues that people talk about, security and transparency. Not only you have to be, you have to be sure that your stuff is secure from somebody else accessing it, but you have to know where it is, and that may be yet another problem because in the cloud, as they say on the internet, nobody can hear you scream, so in the cloud, nobody can truly know where your data is. So that's another issue. So all of them, I mean, we've discussed various solutions, but none of them seem to be ideal, and very little have been really implemented. So it would be very interesting to see what emerges.
Okay. And Matt?
Well, just a plug for the open source solution. I think there's a lot of creativity and a lot of history and a lot of projects currently underway to solve some elements of this. And I think the key is to find the partner that shares the vision for what it is you're looking for. And meets the requirements for what it is you're looking for in this kind of a solution, and can then stand behind it and support it, and that's really what the open source business model is all about. So I'm looking forward to being able to create this and maybe bother some of you folks on some of the implementation details and get you into beta testing.
Mm-hmm. Well, wonderful. And my last thoughts is, as a generic, I mean, as Boris said, there's a lot of movement in this particular space right now. But once you start using it, you got to use it with all your security policies enforced. You can't just say, "Oh, I'm going to use it and rely on XYZ company's encryption or whatever." You got to rely on your own policies, which means you may actually have to encrypt it or not share that data in the first place. So you got to look at it from the whole gambit, not just from, "Oh, I need to share data." There's other ways to share data besides using a cloud-based service.
USB drives
Right.
work great.
Yeah.
Hey,
Because you could
carrier pigeons.
just mail that USB drive.
But I'm not talking about using USB drives as much as I am just making sure you follow good policy and procedure to start with.
Yeah, there's really no alternative to good policy. The best security system in the world can still be compromised by a user not following policy. So.
Yep. Unless you have DLP or, that also begs the question: are you guys planning on putting DLP into this solution?
Today, we're really, given our current approachable market and our size and shape, we're focused almost entirely on sync and share, and on that end user problem of being able to gain access to their data in one place. Over time, through partnerships, yes, but on the current short-term roadmap, DLP is something we're holding off on until we get the sort of the core under us.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Matt. This is a very intriguing area.
Well, it's a little bit of both. It's fun to be in it. It's fun to watch this market grow from nothing, a few years ago to being a pretty big and active market, millions of users. So I'm just happy to be here. And if anybody's looking for more info, owncloud.com, OWN Cloud, owncloud.com to plug the end here.
Sweet.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great week.
Thank you.